I hope that all of those that you love and care for are doing well and staying safe. Last year, filmmakers and documentarians Paul Haggis and Dan Krause released an extraordinary documentary entitled 5B. 5B is an in-depth look at the very first AIDS clinic that was opened in the United States within a hospital. And it was opened at San Francisco General Hospital in the early 80s. And what makes this ward or clinic so extraordinary was the care that the men and women gave to the men who had tragically contracted AIDS, especially in the early years of the disease. And as I was watching the documentary, one of the things that becomes apparent from the very beginning is that the nurses and doctors realized early on, as the men were coming into the ward and being taken care of, they realized early on that there was going to be no cure in the near future. So this meant that they had to shift gears and really take up a new strategy. How were they going to take care of these extraordinarily sick men and still provide some form of hope in their lives? And this was so key because if you were around in the early 80s and late 70s as the AIDS epidemic becomes part of the national narrative, you will remember the amount of bias and hate that so many men who contracted this disease received. And it wasn't just gay men who received the hate. It was those who had received blood transfusions and had accidentally been given the virus in the transfusion. There was so much hate and so much fear in the early years of this epidemic. So the nurses and doctors, who, by the way, were incredibly brave, because in those early years, they had no idea how the virus was spread. They had an idea, or they had a sense of it, but until later on, until the CDC determined that it was spread not through casual touch, the nurses and doctors felt like every day that they were working with these patients that they were in some ways at risk. But it did not stop them from showing amazing, empathetic, and loving care to these men. And that's the key to the whole documentary, and that's the key to what happens on 5B and what makes it such a heroic story. Because when the nurses and doctors realized that they weren't going to be able to cure these men, they decided that they were going to love these men. They decided that they were going to provide an empathetic set of care for them. That the cure was going to come in the form of love and grace and empathy. And what they were able to say to these men on 5B was, I may not be able to physically cure you, but I can be here with you. And so they did all sorts of things. They made sure that they held the hands of many of these patients. In fact, there's a very moving part of the documentary when one of the men who's in the hospital bed, who is clearly sick and at the end of his life, he says to the camera, as one of the nurses is holding his hand, he says, this is the first time I've been touched in a month. This is the first time I've been touched in a month. And it's such a reminder of how important it is of our connection. And I've thought a lot about that, especially in our current state where this particular disease that we're dealing with now creates so much social isolation among us that, we lose the importance of human touch. We lose the importance of being together. The final thing that this reminded me as I'm watching the documentary, and I think this is beyond important for the spiritual life, and that is in and through the love that these doctors and nurses had for these very sick men, what they were saying is, above all, I am in solidarity with you. Above all, I am with you. Above all, I am letting it be known that we are in this together. We are in solidarity. And in doing so, they really were being God's voice to these men. They were being God's presence to these men. I am reminded of the words of Archbishop Oscar Romero, who tragically lost his own life standing up for the marginalized and poor. When Romero reminds us that our calling as people of faith is to become God's megaphone, is to become God's microphone, and to speak the language of God to one another when no one else will. And of course, that is often the language of love. We are called to be God's microphone, God's megaphone. And that's exactly what was happening on this floor. And you see this sense of solidarity in the gospel this morning as well. We're in it, we have kind of this interesting moment where Jesus as the teacher, Jesus as the rabbi, is schooling his disciples. And what he's doing is he's asking them a series of questions. Like any good teacher, he's going to ask questions and then want to know what their answer is. And in this case, it might seem like an unusual question for one grown person to ask another grown person. But what Jesus asked them is, who am I? Or who do people say that I am? And of course, as you know from the gospel, they respond in all sorts of ways. And then Jesus as the rabbi, Jesus as the teacher, narrows his focus on one pupil, to Peter. He narrows him out. And he says to Peter, okay, here's your question. Here's the test. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And Peter responds fairly quickly, at least in the gospel, I know who you are. You're God. You're the Messiah. And as the rabbi, as the teacher, Jesus is not finished schooling Peter, because what he says to Peter is correct. But you know that answer not from your own accord, but because God put that in your heart. You know who I am because God allowed you, God gave you that voice. And in doing so, I think a big part of this moment is that Jesus is reminding Peter, Jesus is reminding the disciples that God is constantly with us. God is constantly urging us to continue. God is constantly voicing God's own wisdom into our souls, saying, you are not alone. I am in solidarity with you. I will give you the wisdom and the grace that you need when you need it. I'm in solidarity with you, right? And that is one of the lasting impressions I think that the disciples leave with, is that in having this voice from God tell Peter what to say, they were essentially being told that God is with them even when they are unsure, right? And they were in some ways echoing what Archbishop Romero was saying in that moment, right? They were echoing what God's will is for the world. They were echoing the desire and need to be God's megaphone and God's microphone. I'll end with this. There's a story about Mother Teresa when she was alive, and the story goes like this. There were a group of evangelical college students who went to Calcutta to work in the hospital slum that Teresa had created. And one of the things that Teresa apparently made every visitor do was to do the dirty part of the job. As a visitor, they were required to clean bandages or clean up soiled linens and to bathe some of the poorest people in the world, people that were most likely going to die because there wasn't enough sort of cure or medical cure to go around. And so these evangelical students for a week were doing all of what they considered to be the grudge work that they didn't want to do, because in their minds they thought that they had come to Calcutta to be evangelical, to tell these poor people that they needed to convert to Christianity. So towards the end of the week, the story goes, as they're getting frustrated with having to do work that they were not anticipating doing, they ask for a meeting with Teresa, and Teresa grants them that meeting. And the leader of the college evangelical group says, look, we appreciate you having us here, but we came here to tell people about Jesus. And the story goes that Teresa pauses and she says, well, the best thing that you can do for these men and women is to bathe them, is to take care of them, is to change their linen, their soiled linen, to do all the things that you don't want to do. Because when they die, the story goes, Teresa says, when they die and they meet God, they can say to God, I know who you are. I know who you are. You were the one who cleaned me when no one else would. You were the one who bandaged me when no one else would. You were the one who changed my soiled linen when no one else did. Right? And Teresa said, that is being present to these people. That's being evangelical, right? That's being God in the flesh, right? To show solidarity, right? To be with them, to be God's microphone, to be God's megaphone. As we get hopefully closer towards the end of our own pandemic, as we hopefully get closer to a vaccine and the end of this difficult period and period unlike any that we've had in this country for over 100 years, I believe that our calling continues to be one of solidarity with one another and one that calls us to be God's microphone and megaphone to each other. And in that megaphone and microphone and in that form of solidarity, what we are called to remind ourselves and to each other over and over again is that God urges us to keep going. God urges us to keep going, and God urges us to reach out to one another and to continue to show grace to one another and to remind one another that as people of faith, we are not promised lives without any difficulty, but what we are promised is that difficulty is redeemable. And so our solidarity with one another is the first fruit of grace. It's the first fruit that we will be okay. Amen.